how much does environment matter? Like when you talk about nature versus nurture, for you, how much of it was what you saw versus just something that you felt inside that told you what you should or should not be doing or feeling?
I think it was majority environment. As I reflect, I don't ever remember talk of mental health or seeing a therapist ever. So what's funny is Brandon mentioned he is from off Wabata, so is my mom, right? So the first time I heard someone express to me to seek mental health in my time of need was my mom passed in 2017. I started reading her journals in 2019, and in her journal she pretty much wrote the journal to me and my younger sister, and it said, when you need help, do not feel embarrassed to go seek help, seek therapy. And that just blew me away. So as I reflect, and I never really tripped off that as much, that was the first time that someone had told me that when you're not okay, go seek help. When she was alive, she never verbally told me that, but maybe, in the time that I needed it most, it's when it was there. I know, so I've been seeing a therapist for maybe like 6 months, and I went to my uncle's house recently, and I told them that I mentioned me seeing a therapist because I know that they probably need to seek some help. I know mental health runs in my family rampant. Everybody suffered from some kind of mental health, depression, anxiety. And when I told them, Uncle said, damn, what's wrong with you? That was his first instinct, was like, what's wrong with me? I was like, well, we all crazy. I kind of made a joke, like, but that was his first thought, like, what's wrong with me because I'm seeing therapy? And he's like 60. So he's never, we kind of had a little short conversation, but he's never known anybody to seek therapy, only going to like the insane asylum. Like, it's such a drastic spectrum of what they picture as seeking mental health. So from my experience, it was totally environment, I guess, a lack of the communication in my environment. I never heard of mental health until I broke down, and I was just, in that time, was reading my mom's journal, and I saw that, and that was the first time I heard someone say, go do it. And then that's began my journey into trying to seek help.
Yeah. And Johnny, I wonder if you had a similar relationship with it, because so many things happened in your life before you went and sought it out. So would you say that you had a similar perception that you only chase it when you absolutely positively need it?
Yes and no, but it was for different reasons. I was lucky enough to grow up with a father. Like my father's my best friend. Like, I love him, but I went through a period where I judged him. Like I said, my mother and father were together, and they both were great to me, but they were terrible for each other. So my dad, was a dad. So when my grandma passed, I got to watch how my dad grieved as a man, but I also got to watch him move forward and how he dealt with it. However, him and my mom didn't get along well. So my mom would criticize my dad for crying, or like poke fun at him for crying, for showing his emotion. So that's what kind of taught me to hide my emotions, because I would watch how my mom would treat my dad when he would show his emotions, and then he would get overly emotional, and then they would end up fighting, and then the police come and they're taking my dad to jail. So that made me not want to be emotional in front of women, because I didn't want to be made fun of. I didn't want to be judged. So my first 2 relationships failed simply because I hid all of my emotions, not to be laughed at. And so it came full circle where I feel like I judged my father for the domestic violence with him and my mother, and I didn't understand his side of the story. I didn't realize that he only snapped because he was getting laughed at and he was getting judged. So it was just so much that I had to unpack. So it took me so long because I had to realize, like, both of my parents loved me. And I was wrong for judging my dad for him fighting my mother. Regardless of what they went through with each other, they both would give their life for me. So I had to disconnect myself from their violence and their trauma. And that's what really helped me to heal. And that's what made me have closure with my father, because I had to think back, and he was a great dad. Like, I remember riding on his shoulders to preschool when I was 3 years old. Like, I remember sitting in the front of his Cadillac. I remember all those things. But it's really easy when you go through traumatic situations to all you remember is the nights where they're fighting. All you remember is seeing your mom bloody. All you remember is your dad in the back of the paddy wagon. And you forget this is the same dad that was walking you home at 2 o'clock in the morning, like, with stuff like that. So I had to disconnect from my parents, and that helped me become myself. I had to go forgive my father for realizing that he was a good father and that regardless of what he was, he could have left. And one of the greatest questions I asked him was, if you could go back and you could just live your life and you didn't have to fight with my mom and be in and out of jail your whole life, if you could have just been a man and been free, how would you do it? And he said, no. He said, I would go back and do it all over again because the man you became is everything to me. I got 6 children. I love all of them. I feel like I'm the greatest father in the world. I'm sure some men will want to debate. But if I don't have a father in my life, I'm not the man I am. I'm not the dad I am. Everything I am is because I got to see my father. I'm 31 years old, and I can call my dad today and talk to him for 4 or 5 hours, and he still telling me he loves me every time we get off the phone. That's privilege to me, because I know most men have never experienced that.
Brandon, can I ask you your reaction to that? Because I wonder, now that you all have discovered mental health in a different way, now you're being parents to Black children who are going to have to go through similar things. So how do you incorporate mental health into your parenting?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is that realizing, because as a Black man, our experiences are different, our teachings have to be different. You know, every man on this call right now has had the talk with their dad about how to interact with law enforcement, you know what I mean? Or not being by yourself, or so on and so forth. But for me, the way it manifests itself is realizing that my son, he's a year and a half. He is not a grown 30-something-year-old man. And so I have to be patient with him. I have to get down on his level and be able to communicate in a way that may require me to be very repetitive until he gets it. And so that's where the patience for me comes into play. But then also making sure that I want him to hear, acknowledge, and respect my voice. I don't want him to fear my voice, because when he fears my voice, I think that most times I will get the opposite reaction that I'm looking for. Like, I never want my son to be afraid to come to me about something. No, come to me, and let's talk about it. But when we, I believe, when we raise our voice and we instill that fear, no one is going to go a place where they are scared or afraid. But then it's also for me just being aware of certain things. Again, I'll be 36 here in April, and in my line of work, I have just become aware in the past year of something that's called ACEs, and it's Adverse Childhood Experiences. And in ACEs, there's like this, there's like 6 or 7 of them, and they rank you upon those 6 or 7 experiences, and you know, it has an impact not only in your childhood, but it can also manifest itself in adulthood that can affect your health, your mental state. And some of them are as simple as not having a parent in the home, or watching someone being incarcerated, substance misuse, right? And that manifests itself, you know, 20, 30 years down the line. But again, I was never aware of ACEs. And so this kind of goes back to Ricky's point, is that it's environment, like we don't hear about it, we don't know about it. And so I think that what's so important for professionals like Nick is that they begin to encourage the fact that this is a safe space. And I think that that's what Dear Fathers, at least the straight mental component, because I want to be clear, Dear Fathers is so much more than straight mental, but straight mental provides a safe space. I mean, we get on that call and there's 30, 40 men on there, and we're talking about any and everything that impacts us from day to day, and how to handle those challenges, and how to seek help when needed. We've had brothers cry on there. We've had brothers that, you know, really are pouring out their heart. And so it gives us this opportunity to help guide, direct, with other individuals that are going through the same thing. But again, for me, it's just not about, I don't want to repeat I don't want my son to experience some of the feelings that I had growing up. So I'm just extremely, extremely mindful of how I interact with him.